Good evening, keepers of the cash. Gary V, the casual comic guy here, and we are starting a brand new show called In the Hot Seat with the Usual Suspects. And we are proud, excited, and completely humbled to have as our first guest the writer and creator of the one-shot indie comic Parallel from Source Point Press. Please welcome Jason Douglas.
Gentlemen, it is a complete honor and pleasure to be here with you this evening.
Pleasure is ours, sir.
Right. We are so happy to have you, man. Especially since, like I said, man, we all loved this book so much. And this is something I'll read again and again. It was a great self-contained story and just absolutely fantastic. But before we get going, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody and let them know a little bit about you.
Sure. Well, as you said, my name is Jason Douglas, and I'm here today to talk about the very first comic book that I have ever written. Lifelong dream come true, right? I've been a fanboy since I was wee. Did the very, very typical comic nerd thing where I did my hiatus in my mid to late teens and didn't come back in the 20s and then dove back in and have never been more in love with comics in the decade since. And as is a theme of Parallel that I'm sure we'll talk about tonight, that idea of dreams deferred, and I put it off, and I put it off, and I put it off, and actually came to this in a very roundabout way. I was doing some other writing. I've been published as a playwright. My day job is I've been a public school teacher for a couple of decades, and like producing and writing plays for kids and getting some of it published. And then one summer I was just like, but the dream's always been comics, and it's time. And I dove in, and this is my first one, and a lot of bits of luck, a lot of bits of hard work all come together in a kind of an amazing bit of an origin story. And here I am being published by the wonderful Source Point Press, and my very first story that I wrote in this form that I love so much, and I think we all do, is now out there in the world.
Nice. And great introduction. If this was your first dive in, man, high scores all around.
Yeah, no doubt. That's what I was going to say, Gary B. I was like, that was his first one. My goodness.
Oh,
it's a story that so it's interesting because it's my first one, but thematically when you read Parallel, you get this very cool dark sci-fi tale about parallel Earths and about second chances and what that costs. But like underlying themes of that existential dread of time passing and not getting those second chances. And like I said, dreams deferred and you don't get to live the thing that you always thought you could and you always thought you would have enough time to do. So that's, Landon's story in this book is he gives up music and lets his dreams of music that he had in his early 20s kind of slip away. And he's then pushing 30 and it's gone, right? He wakes up and it's been 8 years. And for all, most of us, I think it's almost a universal theme, right? It manifests for us in different ways, right? But like that idea of time passing and you don't have time to go back and do those things that you always thought you would do. I was living with that forever, right? It's always at the back of my brain. So, the concept of the story, the themes of the story have been with me for a long time. Was that enough to get me off my butt and motivate me to go write the story? Clearly not, because years and years went by. And even a decent chunk of time before I sat down to write the first half of this one summer, when I decided I'm not going to write a play for kids this summer, I'm going to write this comic instead. A chunk of time before that, like I brainstormed the idea with like a buddy of mine, the sci-fi aspect, the parallel worlds aspect, the fact that Landon's manifesting his existential dread, or in the case of his age, like a quarter-life crisis, I believe the TikTok generation calls it. His quarter-life crisis is manifesting in he's hearing voices and seeing visions, and there's this other version of him coming from this other world that's offering him the second chance that so many of us don't get. And then, of course, unfortunately, where it gets dark and where it gets interesting is what it will cost him might not be very beneficial to his mental health, much less his physical health in the here and now.
Right.
So even that story, or at least the ideas of a parallel you offering you, that exists. Was that enough to get me off my butt and write my first story? No. The third aspect, and the thing that made it all click into place, is kind of unusual because, like I said, day job public school teacher for a long time, which means I've got students, former students, who are literally the age of like Landon and Claire in this book, right? Pushing 30. And I'm in contact still with a bunch of them. And there's a few in particular that a couple years ago, right before I sat down to write this story, I'm in contact with. And I remember a couple of very specific conversations where, you know, they reached out to me and it was like, hey, what happened? Like, where did the time go? Help me understand this. Why am I not in Chicago pursuing my dream of dance, or in New York pursuing my dream of whatever it was, you know, for this kid and that kid? And guys, it just, those three things clicked. And so I took a break from writing a one-act play for middle schoolers at the time. And I sat down very much in a bubble, right? I don't have an artist. I don't have a publisher. I don't have a plan. I just have the story and the motivation and the fire that's now lit under my butt to start typing. Now, I don't know how to do it. And the way I describe this is kind of like a blissful ignorance, right? Like, had I known the intricacies, had I known how hard and how long, would that have been enough to scare me off one more time? Maybe. But I went in there in this bubble with this blissful ignorance and just started. I did my research. I learned how to what a script needs to physically look like, balancing the story. I mean, it's way more complicated than playwriting, which I felt I could do. And I went in there. I was like, yeah, I can do this. I didn't know what I was doing. And I sat down and I wrote the first half of Parallel. I wrote the first 32 pages. And now it exists. And then the whole second half of the process after Source Point buys it is a whole different story. But like, that's kind of where it comes from, right? This idea of it just clicked. Those three things happened to line up. And I sat down and I just did it. And this is the first one.
Right. And that's a lot of times how things go in life, right? You want to do something, then sometimes you end up doing something you didn't even plan on doing, but everything clicks and you end up on a journey. But let's talk about the journey aspect for a second. So every book has its hiccups and its bumps in the road. You got any hiccups that happened on the way to your journey here and in the promotional process?
Oh, yeah, well, sure. More than we have time for, but I'll tell you a couple of fun ones. I think maybe the most embarrassing one for me, but like it's so humiliating and so funny. So like I mentioned, I'd had some plays published, right? The young people stuff that I had written and we had performed. And then one of like the four big North American publishers, Hewer, like picked up one of my plays. And the way that works is they don't take very many each year, but if they take your play, they take it as it is, right? You don't work with an editor, right? So I'm writing skits for kids, I'm writing plays for kids, and then I'm getting these things published. But like, there's no interaction with an editor ever in my writing life, okay? So when I get involved with SourcePoint, and SourcePoint assigns me Bob Sally, the great editor and way better writer than I'll ever be, very accomplished in his own right, and I get that first set of notes. Oh, gentlemen, I got so precious, so fast with my beautiful little script that was perfect in my mind. I mean, nobody's ever told me that what I've written isn't good enough before. Certainly, you know, like a 14-year-old, or when I was doing elementary school, a 10-year-old's not coming up to you, you know, I think you should change this scene. I mean, at that point, you're like, you can walk away. And with the playwright, it just hadn't happened. So I get this first set of notes, and I was furious. I got precious. I got ridiculous. I was storming around the house. My wife is rolling her eyes. I'm calling up my best pal, Dougie, since fifth grade, who's also an attorney, and the one who looked at my attorney looked at my contract for me. And I was like, Dougie, you need to get me out of this. This is ridiculous. 24 hours later, I look at the notes again, and I'm like, oh, everything he said is right. This needs to change. I'm an idiot. He's the expert. I mean, it was all it all made, every single note made the book better. You know, every single note was something that either tightened something up or something that I just instinctively didn't know how to do yet, you know, being the first time. But man, my indignation at the beginning was humiliating. That was the first big hiccup. But I think kind of the one that gave me the closest to a heart attack actually came just before solicitation. So it was a big thrill to me to know that like my book was going to be in previews. Okay. Now there's the big hiccup of publishing during COVID, right? Publishing when at the brink of distribution being really messed up everywhere. But you know, the way Diamond works and worked was you can see the solicitation, I think it's like a couple days before like the magazine just the shops like on the website. And a dude, an owner of a local shop here, like hits me up on the phone and is like, I think you need to go and look at Diamond because I think there's a problem. I'm like, oh my God, what? Because like this is, you know, this is the brink. This is a couple of years of work and blood, sweat, and tears to put this thing together. You're on the verge, right? Like the dream is this close to coming true. And we go to the Diamond website, and number one, the book is misspelled. That's a problem. Number two, my name is misspelled. This is also a problem. Literally a first-time author, somebody who you wouldn't necessarily know anyway. You can't find the book. You can't find it by the name. There's no way to find it because it's all wrong. And I'm like, I'm having a meltdown. Luckily, one of the SourcePoint team, Josh Warner, co-founder and art director, is somebody that it pays to be on his good side. Because when there is like a mission to be done, that dude will get it done in a respectful, but you are terrified to be on his wrong side kind of way. And the massive, you know, monopolizing distributor of comics in the world had that crap changed instantaneously, and then we were off and running. Nice. My God, was that a last-minute heart attack for me.
Nice. All right, so I got a question for you. Do you have any tips or suggestions that you would give to someone thinking about writing a book?
Yeah. So this is going to sound trite for a minute. And I think maybe the first time I heard it, maybe I even reacted for a second, even though where it came from was somebody way up here. But I have had the pleasure and the honor of meeting Neil Gaiman twice. Okay. Nice. Once very much just like at a signing and hello, and it was at a reading or whatever. But one of this, well before I wrote this, we're talking about like years and years before, I met Neil Gaiman at this weird open source Linux convention here in Michigan, right after his publication of his young adult children's novel, Coraline. And I had started, this back when I was teaching elementary school, and I had started as kind of an end of the year special treat for the kids. We were listening to Coraline, to Neil read Coraline on CD at the end of the year by candlelight. Very creepy, very awesome. Okay. And I took a bunch of letters that my kids wrote to this convention and gave them to Neil, and I got to hang out with him for a while. We talked, and one of his daughters was a fourth grader at the time. It's what I was teaching, and it was amazing. And he has said this publicly when he does public speaking, but he looked at me and he said, like, the way this is done, the advice that he gives to somebody when you want to go create, when you want to go write a comic, when you want to go write a book, when you want to go write a piece of music, is you go write a book, you go write a comic, and you go make a piece of music. And that sounds trite on the surface, right? Like the way you do it is you do it. But he explained it, and this has always stuck with me, and I think it's kind of beautiful, and this is what I would pass on as well, is it's always easier to do nothing than something, right? Yes. And he and I and anybody who's ever created anything that came from here, like I can't promise you what happens when you start typing, when you start writing, when you take the leap and pursue your dream. I can't promise you what happens next. But what I can promise you is if you don't do it, nothing will happen. So the way you write a comic is you write a comic. Don't know if it's going to be good, but guess what? If you put it into the world, if it now exists, you can now take the next step, which is to make it better, right? To hone it, to craft it, to turn it into the thing that you want it to be. And maybe it breathes another day and lives another life. But if you don't do anything, if you don't make a comic, if you don't write the thing, it won't exist and absolutely nothing will happen. So you
Great
do
answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Neil Gaiman is like his run of Sandman, epic in my opinion.
It is my favorite storyline of all time.
Yes.
It is one of only 2 books. I talked to very briefly at the top. I talked about my very typical fanboy hiatus, right? Like I hit blah, 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 teen, drop comics for like 9 years. Only 2 books followed me through that hiatus that I reread and kind of came with me, right? Until I went back to my mom's house in my 20s and grabbed a couple of long boxes. And that was Neil Gaiman Sandman, the trades that I had at the time, and then Art Spiegelman's Mouse. Those are the only 2 books that kind of like, even when I quit comics for 9 years, I couldn't. They had to stay with me.
Nice.
Jason, I was interested to know, like, when you're sitting down to write the book, is it more you're just writing a script, or are you doing like a storyboard where you're kind of doing some art with it, or kind of how does that process work when you start to write?
Well, nobody wants to see my art because it's not art. It would hurt your eyes to look at if you made me produce it. But having said that, and especially the first 32 pages where, so like writing the first half of the book and writing the second half of the book were very different experiences, right? First half of the book, like I mentioned, it was in a bubble, right? This was just me and an idea and literally pursuing the dream, yeah? The second half, I am hooked up with the great Adam Ferris through SourcePoint, and I get to pursue that very cliched but very real comic book writer's dream, which is writing for an artist, right? Like I had seen samples. He had done a couple pages for me. He had done some character sketches, and I got to see what he could do. So I literally got to write for him. Story was still there, but like the second half of the book, you guys have read it, is clearly a lot darker than the first half, and that crescendo of possible self-harm and those kind of hard choices and the mental frailty and oh my God, what's going to happen next? Is it real? Is it not real? Is he going to actually do it? Is he not going to do it? That kind of builds and builds and builds. And it's probably a little darker than it would have been just knowing what Adam could do and me writing for that. Having said that, that first half, when I'm kind of just in my own world, I had a very distinct, like if you read my script, while I'm not drawing the pages, I was very conscious of telling the story, but also understanding, or at least trying to understand through my own fandom and reading, and then creating the mathematical equation, which is pacing in a comic book, right? And this is kind of what jumped out at me as I was transitioning from like writing for the stage, which I was kind of doing in my sleep at that point, to writing for a comic book. It is just infinitely more complicated. There's just so much more. I mean, everything, guys, from just like, you've got to learn about, you got to find your template and decide, you know, this is how many times you hit tab before you put this sound effect bit. This how many points, this is where the line goes to do dialogue. This is how you number the panel. All that stuff I had to learn. But I'm also at the same time conscious of, you know, pacing, the idea that this size panel or this number of panels moves your story at this pace, or you want this idea or this image that you've got in your head to be revealed on a facing page, or it needs to be a page turn, right? You need a splash here, you need smaller here, you need certain geometrical things going on here. That whole geometry thing at the beginning with like the parallel lines and the explosions, stuff like that. First of all, by the way, coming literally from me teaching 4th grade math for 13 years. That's not overly complicated. That's me and 10-year-olds going, dudes, there's these things called parallel lines, and here's how they work. But like, yeah, I'm very aware of that. And there was a lot of stuff, like, especially those pages with the parallel lines on it. I physically drew those to show the spacing and stuff like that. I mean, before I ever had an artist, before I ever met Adam. And then like I would occasionally, I guess storyboard would be the right way to say it, though. You know, Adam would never look at that and say, here's a piece of art. It was just a guide. Like in the first half, when I play with that game of the repetition over time with Claire and Landon's relationship, and you see it literally physically moving apart, like all that's deliberate, and that's in my head about okay, they need to be further apart, or let's go from 8 panels to 7 panels to 6 panels to 5 panels on these pages very deliberately. And I would, you know, get out my ruler on a piece of computer paper and physically set that up, sometimes just for me, and then sometimes if Adam needed it too. But oh my God, you would never get me to try to draw one of those figures and whatever. I typed a lot of that description out, but nobody wants to see it. Adam definitely didn't want to see it. It would be embarrassing. You would just shield your eyes. You don't want to see my drawing. Absolutely not.
Quick follow-up to that, Gary, if you don't care. Gary, can I ask a quick follow-up to that?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
One of the other things I was interested as I was reading through it and, you know, just kind of thinking about this interview was how much research goes into what you're writing? Because like you touch a bunch of different things. You touch medical, you touch therapy, you touch police work, you touch music industry. Like how much research goes in to make sure that what you're writing is as factual as it can be?
So I'm really, really glad you asked that. Okay. In the balance in my head, in the things that as I started writing this that I felt I needed to balance, right? The story, the pacing, the physicality of the comic, the how do you even make it look like a script that somebody could recognize? Like literally a dozen things. One of the biggest pieces that was at the forefront of my brain and I wanted to get right, knowing that the comic booky part of this was going to be a dark sci-fi tale about alternate realities and, you know, where injecting into your life and influencing you, that part that does not have a basis necessarily in reality, depending on where your stance on that kind of thing is. I absolutely wanted everything else to be as deeply grounded in reality as possible. Not only because as a reader of comics, I've always really appreciated that. Do you know what I mean? Like I will suspend my disbelief for for X-Men, right? As long as the X, Y, and Z of it, the other pieces of it, like ring true. Okay. So not only that part, but more importantly, because the mental health aspect of this book, I really, really think it's disrespectful for people who go through similar or their own version of that existential dread or that depression or whatever that Landon feels, to not have made at least that aspect of the book as realistic as possible, right? So to answer your question, all of those professions, all of those interactions with Landon, with police work, medical work, psychological work, you name it, thoroughly researched and sourced out to people in my life who are in those professions. So the doctor at the beginning, the paramedics, we are talking about phone calls with my cousin when she got off her shift in a very big, famous Boston hospital and said, okay, here's the situation. Landon has just been squished by a bus. Tell me what the paramedics would say on the way to the hospital. So like, you're not going to get me to repeat some of that medical lingo right now, but because it would out of my mouth, but every single piece of it is exactly what it would be. Every medicine, every amount, everything, every way that we even talked about, like how she might interact with a wife at the thing if this was the reaction. I mean, all of that was sourced. The psychologist was very much sourced with a family friend. The police detective, straight from my college roommate who now works for the DEA, right? How would you guys handle this? Would he be suspicious? Would he whatever? All of it. And I took a lot of pride in that for those reasons that I told you. Like, I like it when that stuff is realistic. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't short shrifting that, because you know what? You never know who's going to read it. And for me, like, you know that thing, like wherever your area of expertise is, and then you watch that show, you watch that movie, or you read that thing, and it's that one thing that takes you out of it. You're like, screw that. That's not how it is. I'm done with it. Everything else could be brilliant. You could love it. But as soon as they get to your gig and it's wrong, you're like, screw this, I'm out.
And you need that base in reality to base you in the story too.
Yeah, I felt that, you know what I mean? Like I wanted that for sure.
So I got a question to follow up with the art of it, because I'm really big on the art complementing the story. All right, so like that's one of the most important things in the medium of comics to me: the pairing of art and story. A good story can be dragged down by mediocre art, or a good story can be made grander when the right art's paired with it. And I thought Adam Ferris fit this really well. And not only did he fit it, I also like that you guys chose to tell this story in black and white. So I'd like you to speak about both of those. One, about how you ended up with Adam Ferris, because his panels were brilliant, especially when it was something that was closing in slowly. Like even at the beginning when he got hit, and it's just slowly going between the two doctors to his face.
Yeah.
The panels were brilliant. His art fit the story. And was it a conscious decision to go black and white? Did you guys fool around with color?
So it's funny because Parallel getting published and me getting Parallel published, I got to be very careful, because I've been told by some of my new friends in the profession that I use the word lucky too often, right? I feel that, I believe that, but some of my friends at SourcePoint are like, you got to be careful. You can't overuse the word lucky, because it does undermine the hard work that goes into making something, to making comics, and most especially to making indie comics, which it's, you know, there are certain companies out there that are a lot bigger than indie comics. And if it takes them a foot of effort, it takes an indie comic a mile. Okay. So I got to be careful when I say lucky, but I am really, really lucky at a series of events. And one of them being, once I got hooked up with SourcePoint, the work that co-founder, president, and editor-in-chief Travis McIntyre put into helping me, didn't know how to do anything, get to this end run was amazing. And he hooked me up with Adam. Okay. I didn't have to go find Adam. I didn't go through the much more typical for today crowdsourcing or crowdfunding process. Like I handed him that first half of the script, again, blissful ignorance, at Motor City Comic Con a handful of years ago. And he was like, it was in a manila folder, a paper copy, not even digital, with color paper clips from my classroom holding the cover letter on. And he's like, I like the cut of your jib. This sounds interesting to me. You've got a lot of hustle. It feels like you're trying to sell me a comic concept in 1970. Do you realize this is 21st century? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. But he liked it. He bought it. And then he set me up with Adam. And like I told you before, it was so cool once I saw what Adam could do to kind of help write for him. But that dude had more experience than me. So like his influence on it, like as soon as I saw that he could go dark, I went darker. This compliment that I like to pay Adam, that I don't even understand what I'm saying when I say it, but I have to say it because it's true, is there was a lot of ambiguity in this script, right? There's a lot of ambiguity from the ending, right?
Yes.
Your mileage may vary on how you think that last panel goes, to even throughout the book where there's points in the story where Landon thinks that it's all happening in his head. There's points in the story where Landon knows all this interaction with his alternate him is actually happening. And you as a reader probably go up and down with that too. And while a lot of that's in the script, what amazed me, I think, most about Adam is the dude can draw ambiguity. Like, I don't even know what that means when it comes out of my mouth, but the dude can draw ambiguity. It's amazing. And one of the things that I like about comics the most, or my favorite comics, my favorite books, my favorite stories, my favorite writers, is rereadability. Okay. And do I hope, and did I have in mind that Parallel as a story is something that you can go back and reread? Absolutely. But I really think, kind of like a good movie with some like nice Easter eggs in it, going back and rereading this a second time, a third time, or whatever, there are things that Adam layers in there, obvious, a lot of times really subtle choices that he made that just even blow me away upon rereading and looking at it again. Just little clues and little things, and you might even have a different take the second time through about a certain page, a certain panel, a certain piece.
The black and white was great too.
The black and white was actually Travis's idea too. And I think there was a point where I was seeing it in color, but not because I thought it had to be, but because that was just my assumption, because most comics that I've ever read have been in color. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And then when Travis made that call, and Adam and I started working from that perspective, and Adam started to play with different shading and gray tones and different, I mean, he like invented a couple of new things to make, especially the interactions between other land and real land, and when they physically come in contact with each other, like he tried new things that he had never tried before, and it just worked better than it ever could have in color. There is that panel. Do you guys know the panel? It's literally my favorite panel in the book, where Landon is sitting. Oh God, it's gone bad for him again, right? He's gone from a good place. I think I've got this thing under control, and then it's falling apart for him again, and other Landon is haunting him. And there's that panel where he's sitting in the chair in his apartment, and you've got it's like you see the Venetian blind lights coming through. This is not a noir book, but that is the noirish panel if I've ever seen one. There it is.
Yep.
Like that dude drew that, and I was like, you are my best friend forever. Like it's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous page, but that panel right there, like that's Adam. That guys, that doesn't look like that in color. That's black and white, or it doesn't work, I don't think.
Oh, I agree.
And it sets a great mood. Yeah,
for sure. I loved it. Yeah. The partnership we had was so good because he respected the story. He helped me tell the story. I mean, there were points towards the end where he literally cut one of my panels out, and he's like, the pacing's going to work better for this. And then I'd have to go back in and rearrange the dialogue or cut something or whatever there. And he was right every single time. His visual pacing and his storytelling, and then clearly some of these magic tricks of like drawing ambiguity. There, I said it again. I still don't know what it means, but it is true. Look, it's always the writer's dream, where you dream that your words become art, right? But when the artist makes your words and puts them in a visual medium better than you imagine them in your head, it's not supposed to work like that, right? Anybody who studied Greek philosophy in school, in high school or college, knows that the perfection of idea is supposed to be in your head. And once it goes out in the world, it's supposed to be lesser, okay? It's that chair thing. It's that Greek chair thing. Adam took ideas that I thought were perfect in my head and made them better on the page. What else can you ask for?
Right.
And that's the power of comics too. Of this medium.
Oh, for sure. Right. Absolutely. Like I have come in this process. There's a chance that I always believe this, but this process, if it taught me nothing else, it's that I truly, truly believe that comics are the most malleable medium to tell a story in. Okay. They do so many things that film does, but a bunch of stuff that film can't do. Comics do a ton of stuff that prose can do, but a bunch of stuff that prose can't do. It's like this weird amalgamation in the middle that allows you to literally tell any kind of story. And you guys and I were talking about this off camera before the show started, right? Comics have the ability to do that. Because of the nature of the United States' comic business dating back to the mid-30s and the way it developed being very superhero dominant, and please do not get me wrong, this is not about me just badmouth superhero comics. It's what I grew up on. It's what I still have my first love in. but like Europe doesn't suffer from this quite as much. Japan certainly doesn't suffer from this quite as much, but like US comics have this constraint in the most malleable medium to still only have this limited storytelling ability. It's not 100% true, but the big companies have their limitations. For all the advantage that Marvel and DC have over 80 years of infrastructure to be able to spread their product wider than anybody else, get it to as many people, and faster and more efficiently than anybody else. It's truly the indie comics of right now that are taking advantage of the most malleable medium on the planet, in my opinion, because it's in indie comics where not only can you tell every story, but we try to tell every single story we possibly can. And I think that it's what makes indie comics right now, even in the 21st century, kind of the magic sweet spot of your most eclectic and interesting and risk-taking stories that we're telling in this medium.
For sure. Like if anybody that knows me will tell you, other than Batman, of course, indie comics are my jam. Like you were talking, you said, the ability to tell your story, is so much bigger with indies than it is in Marvel or DC because it's so constrained for them. But we're talking about the process of, writing the book and stuff. What is one of the most surprising things that you learned in the creation process of writing the book?
Well, the thing that I learned is what now has changed how I read comics for my own pleasure. And that is, I have a much deeper appreciation for the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into it. Right. And, I don't want to say that in my I'm on this side of the comics creation process thing that I was like completely oblivious to time and effort and whatever, but I took it for granted like most of us do, right? It was designed in the 30s and then the 40s to be a disposable medium. One of the reasons why blah, blah, blah from the golden age of comics is worth so much is not only because it's a character or a first appearance or something, it's because there's very few of them left, right? You read them, you tore them up, you passed them on, and they probably just got tossed. We still, if we're a Marvel and DC culture, we're still reading comics on a monthly basis, right? Like the money for the longest time wasn't in the collecting and the rereading. It was in a story that you then had to read the next story or wanted to read the next story the next month, right? And so I read comics as a kid that way, right? Just you move on. And you don't realize, I think, a lot of times as a reader and as a consumer, even as an appreciator, how much time and effort, and like for a story like this, there's a couple of years of process behind it. Because I know it's a little meaty, right? I wrote a lot of words and it's 64 pages. But like you can sit down and read parallel in one sitting, right?
Yeah.
And then you're done. And then you go off and do the dishes and you go off and have dinner. But there's a couple of years of effort and process and a team behind it. And so that I don't want to say caught me off guard, but really opened my eyes. So now every time I read something, whether it's like a 22-page floppy or a big fat trade, I see the time, I see the effort, and I see the team behind it in a way that I didn't before. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. More appreciation for the book as opposed to just, hey, that was a great book. Or you're not so quick to say, hey, this book wasn't that great, because now you're like, oh, it wasn't that great, but I see the work and the time that was put in to make this book. But it is
100%.
I wanted to dig a little deeper into what you were talking about just a second ago about indie comic books, because Jason and I talk about this a lot. Like, I'm a huge DC fan. I love the superhero books, but when I get my stack of books, the first thing I go to read are my indies. That's the first thing I go to. And I just wonder, is it my age? Is it because I'm getting older? Or is it just that those stories are that much more interesting because you kind of know what you're going to get when you read a Superman book? You know what you're going to get. I picked up Parallel, started reading it, and I was like, holy, where's this going? And I find that a lot with a lot of the indie books I read. Can you talk a little more about that and the differences you see between the, indies and the mainstream?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both, right? Like, am I ever going to give up my mainstream, my big two, my first loves, right? Probably not. But like we talked about before, I do believe that there is, and this isn't on the writers and this isn't on the artists, but there are parameters of limitations that are based on tradition, based on precedent, and based on economics that to keep producing something that sold the month before or whatever, or what is expected out of something, because there's such a long ingrained, I mean, that infrastructure is coming back to bite you in the butt, right? Advantage A, B, and C, but then can you then tell this kind of story or take that kind of risk? Maybe not. But I just saw Sith down in the comments, like, if you want to tell a truly adult story about anything, indies is the way to go. And there's no limitations. There's no governor on there holding it back in any direction, right? From the most abstract or ridiculous to the most just pure realistic depiction of, I mean, look at good Lord, look at American Splendor. Look at Harvey Picar. I mean, that's just what that dude did in Cleveland on that day in the middle of February, right? Mm-hmm. And yet we're compelled because it's from here, and if you can relate to it, yeah, let's go. I mean, of course, that's what you want to see, right? I mean, something that you can, if you can relate to it, and that's something that I was hyper aware with writing this. Like this concept, like as much fun as you might have with Parallel as the stakes get higher and higher and more intense and more otherworldly with Landon and it gets dark and it gets scary and it gets interesting. Like at its core, and what never left my head and was always at the forefront of this process of writing these 64 pages was that what I truly believe universal thing that we go through, that relatable thing. Your dream might not have been music like Landon's was. Your dream might not have been writing a comic like mine was. Your dream might have been, I don't know, starting an interview show, starting a podcast, starting a YouTube channel. Maybe it was. Whatever yours was, when time passes, when we defer those dreams, when we make decisions in our life because we got to pay the next bill, because it's easier to do this than to do that, than to take this risk or whatever, or to say no or to say yes, when we let time pass, that dread builds up and it manifests for us in different ways. And the irony is, because we all manifest our depression, our anxiety, our whatever in a different way, it feels very isolating. It feels like we're doing this alone. I mean, you see that with Landon, right? He is very alone at different points. Even when he's seeking out help, he feels like he can't. Who do you talk to about that? Like, who do you deal? Who can relate to the fact that there's another version of you in your head and now in front of you, tempting you to do horrible things just to get this thing that you thought was gone? We all deal with it differently, and thus we feel we're alone. And yet that's the great irony, because literally everybody's going through it. It's like this universal thing. Your mileage may vary on how you do it, but Landon's every single one of us. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just like, I was very conscious of making this something that you could relate to and go, yep, I get that. I know exactly what's happening right here, because that's my favorite type of story. If you let me if I can lock in with you, I don't care if it's in a genre or a subgenre that wasn't my favorite at 12, right? Like I was not a cosmic Marvel or DC guy as a kid, right? Wasn't my thing. You put me in outer space, you get Silver Surfer on his board and he's out there and there's just nothing to ground it. I'm out until I find the story where I go, oh God, it's actually about exactly what I'm feeling right now, or I felt last month or last year or whatever. And then I care about outer space, I'm in, right? Now outer space is the best. Now the cosmic stories are the best because I am with you, because I relate to something human at the core that's me too.
Great answer.
So kind of going off that. So how important was it for you to tell like a story about consciously making a self-aware choice to change one's life like Landon does? And did it help exercise any lingering past experiences personally?
Well, yeah. I mean, guys, I put off writing a comic for like 2 decades. So like this is about as cathartic as it gets. If this is my I've got another project lined up. All I need is for SourcePoint to give it the green light, and I'm off and running and doing this again with something else that I feel good about. But if this is the last one, I exercise that demon, right? I can't, my dying day, however far in the future that may be, I am now not allowed to do that thing where I have a regret that God, if I had only, because I just did it, right? So like, oh, for sure, this is it. He's not me, I'm not him. There's a little bit of me in every single one of these characters, right? It's not autobiographical in that sense, but yeah, this is me making that change, finally taking that leap, and yeah, I was self-conscious of it for sure. Yes.
His self-conscious leap too to take more control of his life, which was
and then like we kind of hinted at without giving away too much. I mean, regardless of how you view the ending, right? And anytime somebody talks to me about this and says, "Is it this way? Is it that way?" I read it this way, and I'm like, I think it says a whole lot more about each reader, depending on how you think this ends, and maybe it says about the book or me.
I love that it ended that way. Like I loved it, like the way that it ended. It's almost like The Sopranos fade to black. Like you just kind of guess what's. I loved it.
There's a little bit of interpretation to go there. Little inside baseball for you. A little whatever. And this isn't the most subtle thing Adam did. Go back to that last splash page, right? Where clearly we're at where we're at. Make sure you look on either side of Landon as he's entering.
Oh, I did.
Reflections. Yep. And there's some very much like, well, could that mean that then? And could that mean that then? That's all Adam, and that I bow down to his expertise in that.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of going into that same kind of question, like you're talking about how the story hits home. It hits home on a lot of different levels for me personally, but I'm sure it hits, a lot of people the same way. But is Landon is he a character based on someone in particular, or is he just based on the struggle of life in general with a lot of people?
I wanted, like, I picked his age because of that story I told you guys about the age of some of my former students, and it's that in my mind, him being at that spot in his life, that age, that far into a dead-end career that was not of his dream choosing, at least, right? Is very much based on that. Seemed to me the perfect thing. Like, you've got that thing in your late teens, early 20s where you think you have forever, and that you close in on 30. And I remember this as being that first time where that very adult, you guys know that adult cliche that the old people used to tell us, where they're like, time starts to move faster, and one day you'll wake up and 5 years or 10 years are just gone, and you're like, where the hell did they go? Like, I remember that being true for me the first time about that age, right? Where, like, wasn't 21 just the other day, and it's literally been 8 years. So that's why he's there. He's a little bit me. He's a little bit everybody. He's not based on anybody in particular. I picked music because back before I had kids and my life was not scheduled down to the minute and in service of them, who I love very much, my burnable free time was reading, music, concerts, movies. Just give it, all of it, give it to me. So I picked like one of those things and said, okay, old school band, right? That's his dream. But definitely not based on any one person in particular. Now, having said that, and what we talked about earlier, some of our side characters are, right? I mean, some of those names, those professions like we talked about are very much clearly inspired by not necessarily the physical look of them, but like who I thought of were those people in my life that I talked to make it as realistic as possible.
Yeah, because they were all really relatable, all the
Yeah.
characters, and that's what made me think that is maybe you knew a lot of these people. So
I mean,
turns out you did.
I do. Absolutely. I mean, for the minor characters, obviously I do, but I know Landon. I definitely know Claire.
Yep.
Are they one person? Absolutely not. But I know them for sure.
And the interactions are just so fluid. Like nothing feels false.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
No, it really does. It's so good. And I don't know why this stood out to me. Like after I got done reading the book and I was kind of thinking about it and I was like, you know, and I guess it's what I love about comic books because, you know, the words were so good, but and you talked about it just a little bit ago, you kind of saw it in your head, was the scene where it was just panels of them essentially growing apart. And I thought, and that just really stood out to me for some reason. And so that was in your mind, like as far as don't need words here, nothing needed to be said. You could just see through the art and what was going on that they were growing apart and where he was at in his life, where he was getting to.
There were scenes or portions of the book that I remember having more fun writing, but the intensity of the planning of that was in my head pretty early on. And this is, you know, pre getting hooked up with Adam. So this is just me deciding physically what I wanted that to look like, right? Like as I was making story decisions, I'm trying to be clever. I'll admit it. I was trying to be clever. I was trying to find something that, you know, and not trite and clever, but like really something that could be symbolic physically and pacing and visually and in the storytelling. And I remember really spending a lot of time saying, okay, repetition says one thing, right? Like repetition over time suggests, but at the same time, the subtle changes over time of how that repetition breaks down or how that repetition physically moves them apart. So like in those repetition of panels, as the years go by and their relationship stagnates in the way it does in his life, like the way I wrote it in there and then the way Adam drew it brilliantly is like, you know, the expression on his face changes. The scene, the repetitive panel of them going to bed at night, and you'll notice that over time they're next to each other, and then they just slowly, and it's just moving further until they're on the edges of the bed, right?
Yep.
So it's the same, and yet it's still showing change at the same time. And those are all things that, like, you know where that came from? I'll tell you where that came from. And this is I've never said this before because this popped into my head today. And it popped into my head today because I was with students today and we introduced my favorite novel in all of middle school, S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders. And I have read The Outsiders like 15 times. And I never fail to find new things in it. I never fail to find more depth. I never fail to go on a scene that I've read 15 times and go, oh my God, this line stacked upon this line probably, maybe, possibly could mean this. And that kind of repeated reading that I've done in my life for the things that I love the most, you know, was definitely a conscious thing that I was doing when I was planning out this book. I wanted there to be layers. I wanted there to be things that you would notice. Yes, Pony Boy. Yeah. Oh my God. When I told the kids that there was a character they're going to read called Pony Boy, his brother's name's Soda Pop, and then their older brother is Daryl, I got a laugh today. It was a good joke. But like that was definitely a conscious thing where I wanted those layers. I wanted there to be symbolic depth in not only the words, not only the scenes, but the design of the pages even. you know, the geometry means something, I think. And then the physicality of that there's that piece in the middle of the book where you literally, and I don't know if anybody's ever noticed this before, but there's this crescendo where the tension is building, and like the 7 pages leading up to it, it goes 7 panels, 6 panels, 5 panels, 4 panels, 3 panels, 2 panels, and just to build until it explodes. I like that. I thought that was, you know, something that it actually was enjoyable to create it and write it.
And I did notice that.
Yep.
I did too.
And it really helped with the flow and passage of time. It felt really, as a reader, the passage of time flowed really well with the way it was set up.
And I don't know, like, I don't even know how to wrap I wrote this a while ago, you know what I'm saying? And I really don't know how to wrap my brain around where I was as a creator then, because it was until Bob as an editor got his hooks in certain aspects of it. Like, this is pure instinct, guys. This is not my second script. Do you know what I mean? Like, this isn't
right.
This is, I mean, you know, I read how to physically, like, I found this Fred Van Lente template online that helped me about, you know, when I was talking about like how far you indent this type of line and how you italicize this thing and you don't italicize this thing. But a lot of what we're talking about right now was just like gut. From what I liked, what I wanted to tell, what I was hoping for, but not through training and not through experience. So like with the second project that I was hinting at, and this thing where I've already written the first script, it'll be interesting to me if that ever gets published, what that looks like. And if I talk about it like in an interview with you guys, like a year from now or something, how you read it, because that will then have my gut storytelling instincts, plus an editor who's better than me, plus an artist who's a better storyteller than me, plus a little bit more of me knowing what I'm doing. And that I'm thinking will kind of just be a fascinating thing from my end of it, going, oh, okay, I can see the difference between these two things because I'm further along in my journey.
Well, and speaking of
you guys are getting a lot of really raw, I've never thought of this before things tonight. This is not
that's fantastic.
Anywhere near one of the rote interviews I've done where, like, okay, here's my anecdote for this bit, here's my anecdote for this bit, because I'm good at that. Remember, I'm a middle school teacher, so you guys know what that means, right? It means I need to say the exact same things to 8 different classes. The jokes need to be in the same spot. The pacing needs to be the same. I've been on the stage myself before where my director used to ream the crap out of us if we were like 30 seconds over on a 2-hour play. Like, you guys went 30 seconds long tonight. You're grounded, basically, in director speak. I can do that. And we are talking about some things that I've never thought of, much less said out loud before. So
well,
you guys are doing a heck of a job because you're sending me in places I haven't been.
Nice.
So tell us about, so you've mentioned it a few times, the team and Source Point.
Yeah.
So tell us about the journey of bringing this idea to Source Point and how it got there, and how critical they were in the involvement of this project becoming a reality.
Okay, I'm going to say the dirty word again. Lucky. I'm not going to say it again because I don't.
Yeah, but my grandpa always told me that lucky looks a whole lot like working overalls.
Your grandpa's a wise man. Yeah. So I sat down. I wrote those first 30 pages in the bubble. The blissful ignorance of not knowing how difficult it was, not knowing how much time and effort was going to go into it. It was just something I had to do, right? You got that fire under your butt. You're compelled, so you do it. And I got to the 32-page point. In my brain, I thought that was like an oversized issue 1, I think, at the time, if I remember correctly. But it's clearly halfway through the story. And I said, well, that's the point where I need to at least explore what could come next. And I did my due diligence, and I'm looking around And I'm a pretty archaic, old school guy where I really, really ignored, not deliberately, but because I didn't even know better, the kind of, self-publishing, crowdfunding option that dominates literally the majority of comics today, right? And I poked around online and I looked at all the publisher websites, and nobody wants unsolicited stuff, right? And those that aren't accepting unsolicited pitches don't want your script. They want some art, maybe a pitch. And again, had I known that was a big closed door in my face, could that have shut me down right there? Yeah, maybe. But again, ignorance is bliss. What I do is okay, I guess what you do next is, if it's 1970 and not like the 21st century, what you do next is you go into your school classroom and you get the old school, the yellow file folders, the manila folders, and you put copies of your script in there with a nice cover letter and those beautiful colored paper clips out of my desk drawer, and you put together these little pockets, again, like it's packets, like it's 1970, and you go to a convention, you hand it to a publisher, because that's the way it's done in the digital age, isn't it, fellas?
Right.
So I took a small stack of these, and I go to my local big con, which is Motor City Comic Con, and I walk in there, and the first booth that catches my eye, lucky, you call it what you want, is the Source Point Press booth, because these guys, this is pre-previews, this is pre them growing at an exponential rate like they are right now, but they were crushing it on the con circuit for years, like made their bones on the con circuit. Okay, these guys know what they're doing, and their booth is gorgeous, and I lock eyes with this one striking gentleman who has the most luxurious, amazing red beard you've ever seen in your life. Luck intervenes again. That happens to be Travis McIntyre, co-founder, editor-in-chief, president of Source Point Press. We have our interaction. He's like, "You're weird. The way you're doing this is weird. I like what you're doing. I'm going to read it tonight. Come back and see me at the con tomorrow. We'll talk about this." And that's how that relationship starts. Wow. I think I can't speak for Travis on this, but maybe he sensed that I'm like a naive idiot when it comes to how modern comics are made. And he actually puts me through the process in a much more old school way. And he hooks me up with the artist, right? He sends Bob Sally my way instead of usually a reverse version of I come to you with a lot of this stuff done and you become my publisher. He held my hand through all those, or sent me the people who held my hand through all that process. But in getting hooked up with Bob and getting hooked up with Adam, and then the amazing Justin Birch, who did a fantastic job on these letters and in all of his books, whether he's doing indies or whether he's doing big 2 books and getting nominated for awards. As I'm meeting these people and getting hooked up to these people, and the amazing Casey Pierce, who wrote the foreword, you and I were talking about off air before we started, what I realized about SourcePoint, and I'm now forever appreciative of, is as big as they're getting in indie scale, it's a family, and they run it that way, and I think it makes all the difference.
Nice.
Like nobody works harder. Nobody works harder with you and for you. Nobody supports you more, but doesn't let you get away with crap, right? Remember those first edits from Bob where he was brutally honest and it almost made me throw a fit and cry and quit. He's not letting me get away with garbage, but like it's a family. And I think that's the secret to their success. I'll give you a case in point. Middle of lockdown and pandemic. This is a small press company. There's no guarantee that they're going to survive this, right? Because this is all unknown to us. What they did, they're running sales on their website, right? You can order stuff directly through them. And every single order, you get to checkout, and you type in the name of your closed down local comic shop. And the equivalent of like 25% of your order goes as a direct bonus support payment to that LCS that was closed, that brick and mortar.
Wow.
So
Wow.
like a small company that's fighting for its survival in unknown times is using what clout that they have and what power they have to support the community that is suffering as much or more than they are. And like, I mean, I knew before that, but right then, like, it sealed it for me. Like, this family knows what they're doing. They care about the product. They care about the community. They understand the symbiotic relationship of everything being connected, especially in indie comics. And that was it.
You knew you were in good hands.
I don't know what happens to me as a writer in the future, but like, if they'll have me, I'll stick with them. It's amazing. You know what I mean? I just blown away by that. So I love them. It's a great operation.
Yeah, how someone treats you makes a world of difference.
Did you have? Oh, sorry, Jason.
I was going to say we're both Jason. Imagine that.
Sorry,
that's a great name. I was going to say, like, a lot of things with reading books to me is you read something and you visualize it. You actually see it. It comes to your head. And one of the greatest lines I think I've ever read in comic as of late is your line where the voice is talking to him, trying to convince him that his life sucks, basically. And he's talking about the job. And the line reads, "Your employment makes Tom Hanks' gig from the fluorescent flickering hell in Joe versus the volcano look like a lottery win." That was just brilliant. And yeah.
I am a sucker for a good illusion, for a good reference to a bit of pop culture that I love, right? There is, I am a child of the first 10 seasons of The Simpsons, right? And I cannot tell you how many things in culture I know about, not from the direct source, but from some random, I'm writing this line for 5 people reference that The Simpsons went and put in there, and that's where I know it from, right? So dropping in a lesser known Tom Hanks reference to, Joe versus the volcano, I mean, it works for the moment, right? But that's just me going, here's something I love. I'm putting it, like, it's one of the most fun things that I do. And I did it a lot, even in my, like, I can't even tell you how many jokes were in the plays that middle schoolers put on that were just jokes for the adults in the audience and just jokes for me. Do you know what I mean? Like just all the time. I wrote this play. The last play I wrote for elementary schoolers before I moved to middle school was a Sherlock Holmes homage, right? Where like it's literally like it was called Elementary 101, which is obviously right. And it's like a 5th grade detective who has been the star detective of the school for the last couple of years, but she's graduating, got to pass the mantle on to the younger protege. And I cannot tell you how much fun it was to we at our rap party, I handed them a piece of paper with like the 78 Easter eggs that I had written into this one play from the Sherlock Holmes skull on the mantelpiece, which is a very Sherlock Holmes thing, to this line, which is a reference to this, which is a reference to this, that this name, just the middle name of this character that you only hear once in the play is clearly a reference to this very obscure Arthur Conan Doyle character that was only in one scene of one thing. I mean, I eat that stuff up, right?
Yeah, I love it too.
I'm going down a YouTube rabbit hole. It's watching a really good YouTuber's take on an MCU movie where they find, they frame the one frame and go, and that's from issue 78 from 1964, where blah, blah, blah. You can just see it in the background. Give me that all day. So dropping in a Tom Hanks reference, that's like walking and talking for me.
Yep.
And we all got it because we're that age.
Right.
Exactly.
I'm so glad. You are the first people to ever mention that to me, and that makes you I cannot tell you how delightful that is.
We were having a conversation about that live before the show.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, like that is, God, for as much as I love a lot of Tom Hanks movies, and you know what, we got to do this right now. my favorite thing to kind of mention that's a bit like, oh my God, really, we're going to talk about this, is that rumored thing. Do you guys know where I'm going to go with this? The rumored thing that somewhere in the Tom Hanks movie contract is there's got to be a scene with him peeing, because literally there's like 25 movies where he's got a pee scene, and it's just mind blowing. And you go, really? And then you start naming them off, and you go, well, Money Pit, yes.
Yep.
Castaway, yes. League of Their Own, yes.
Yep.
Green Mile, it's a freaking plot point. I mean, and it goes on and on and on, right? But really, the two things, and this is one of them. There's just something about that scene in Joe versus the Volcano, that physical comedy acting, when he's looking up at those flickering lights and his face is just
twitching.
I'm just fascinated by it. I just thought it was so brilliant, and it's just something that was in my brain, right? It'll never be out of my brain. And when I'm writing that scene, and it's like, that's where it goes.
Yeah. I love the Easter eggs too. Like when we were discussing one of our other shows, we were discussing this Zack Snyder cut. I had brought up a bunch of different Easter eggs that I had seen, and that's one of my things too. I love finding Easter eggs.
You just add a layer to it that's fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
The one question I had, I was just interested, and I think I might have missed what you said, was like when you were shopping the book, like when you were just going around handing this thing out, did you have other companies reach out to you about the book, or was it just Source Point and you were like, I'm going with Source Point, I mean, like, how did that work?
It's the first one I stopped at.
Really?
It's the first one I stopped at. This is my first script. That was the first human I handed it to. Again, like I'm gonna avoid saying the L word, but like, really, the first.
It was just that good.
I walked up to. He was the first person I handed that to in the public sphere, and here we are now.
That's awesome. I mean, sometimes it's your gut, though, right? Like you feel it, like you can feel the connection. I've done that before in business, where it's the first person I talked to, and there was just a connection. Like I could feel it, and it just worked out.
I mean, I don't know if this means anything, but like his beard was really cool, and that's who I walked up to.
And you were good. That's awesome.
That's who I'm talking to, folks. Yep.
And then you could just tell all your friends that your script was so good, it only needed one stop.
One time.
I could say that, but the BS meter would go off on just about anybody.
It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing.
It really was.
Yes.
Like I sat down and started reading it, and I was like, okay. And then I was like, okay, where's this going? And then it just kind of took me on this ride, right? And I just loved it. I mean, like it was phenomenal.
Well, I really truly appreciate that. I mean, that's the kind of feedback that warms your heart. And like I said, I mean, it's not that new appreciation that I have for the work that goes into it. So like hearing that, it really, really makes those 2.5 years worth it. You know what I mean? So I appreciate that. I will tell you this though, like for anybody listening, anybody watching, that this is intrigued at all. Another point about indie comics that not only is this important for me and my future in the industry and the success of the book itself, but I want to make a broader point as well. $1 you spend for indie comics goes a whole lot farther than it does for the big two. And again, this is not me bashing where my comics fandom starts, okay? But like Parallel, 64 pages, $6.99 price point for a pretty dense book. Like that $7 goes a whole lot farther for a company that $7 is what gets the next book out, literally puts food on the table, literally puts clothes on backs. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So like when you go out and when you've got comics fandom, you spend money on one hand. Most of us spend money because it's something that intrigues us or something that we like. But there is a type of fandom that I am discovering, especially being in part of the indie comics world, is you can say a lot. And you can do a thing where you're supporting small press or small business or an LCS or an independent creator. And it literally means more. because of the nature of how small it is and how much closer it is without that 80 years of infrastructure that we mentioned before, of what selling one book means as opposed to 10,000 copies of whatever's hot right now. So like if you are interested, right, if this interests you at all, you can get this book. It is out there in the world right now, and there's a bunch of really easy ways to do that we can talk about if you guys want to.
Right.
And then
links are in the description below.
Even if you come and hang out with me and come and see me on Instagram, I've even got right now, like we're having this interview, and right now I'm doing this giveaway for a one of a kind. There's only one of these in the world. Hand painted variant cover of the book by Esteban, who did this. Talk about a fanboy moment, gentlemen. My book has got 3 variant covers that came out of order. This is not designed by me. This is not asked by me. 3 variant covers. 2 of them sold out in less than 48 hours. This is one of the sold out ones. This is
nice.
right here. Okay?
And the other one feels like Donnie Darko.
Well, I mean, this was inspired by Donnie Darko. Now this.
So it is an homage. Okay.
Right. And then this is one of those sold out covers that you can only find occasionally on eBay that Esteban this is a hand painted one of a kind over the top of this cover. So you get this sold out cover that you can't get anywhere else. And then this one of a kind with the COA there. And I'm doing a giveaway right now. And one of the ways that you can get extra entries in it. So like you got to jump through the hoops of, you got to like this post and repost and stuff like that, that normal IG thing that I'm learning how to do. But one of the ways you can get extra entries is if you go and support SourcePoint and me by buying a digital copy of Parallel or buying a paper copy of Parallel, gets you extra entries. And then this other thing, because indie comics have to fight for oxygen and space in the comics world. So another way to get extra entries to get this one of a kind, only one in the world, awesome cover is if you go and nominate Parallel and me and SourcePoint for the Ringo Awards, which are open right now.
The Ringo Awards.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just another way.
Award.
Yeah, it's just like another way to get word out there that these books exist in a market where we're this big compared to some of the bigger things.
You're a shoe-in, Jason.
I don't know about that. In fact, I'm pretty sure not about that, but I'm not going to turn away if you wanted to put my name in there, and I would certainly appreciate it.
So
yeah, that's what they call me, is Ringo. Like
Yeah,
they're the Beatles.
Oh,
I'm Ringo. I'm the Ringo of the Beatles.
Nice.
So we can't talk about this book and how good it is. We just can't. We can't leave this out. It'd be doing a disservice to your book. Tell us about that fabulous intro, the foreword, because that foreword, is not only is it concise and fantastic, but it puts you in the exact mental state you need to be in to start reading your story. It just really is complimentary to the whole process.
One of the most central members of the SourcePoint family is Casey Pierce, who is a wickedly talented writer, has become a very good editor, and in the past few years has become my hero, my friend, and my mentor in this process. And she has written some very successful and very powerful books and has accomplished some pretty cool things. And it was my absolute honor when Casey said she would be more than happy to write the foreword to my first book. And so those are Casey's words, these 2 pages right here. And I half joke about this, mentioned to you this before, but legit, I'm not messing around. Her foreword to this book is worth the price of admission in itself. You don't need to read my panels. You don't need to read my pages. You don't need to look at Adam's art. You are getting your money's worth on her 2 pages of the foreword.
It's true. It's brilliant.
I could not be more honored that she said yes, and I'm forever in her debt for it.
Yeah, that line where she says, I'll take a minute while you digest this.
Uh-huh.
That was genius.
Yeah, she's good. She's good. She's good.
Yeah.
But it was like setting up your story so well. Just, put the ball on the tee and then just crack the home run.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, it was.
I let my wife read it. I go, as soon as I read it, I literally ran in the other room and I'm like, come here, you got to read this. I go, and she sat down and read it and she was like, wow. Yeah, it was that good.
Yeah, she's my hero for a reason.
Trying to get in on this Ringo Awards site and nominate you right now if you're not already, or at least vote.
Excellent. Yeah, you got to jump through a couple of hoops, but it's pretty cool. There's no spam involved or anything like that. They just want to make sure you're not a robot, so you can't spam the whole thing. I think.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. Is I'm clicking on a motorcycle.
It's the pick a bus or something like that.
Pick a bus. So my last question for you is, I'm a big reader. I like to find new authors, stuff like that. Who are some of your favorite authors or someone that maybe influenced you?
When you say last question, are you okay with us running for another 2.5 hours while I make my list? Because
sure,
we're here for the long
haul. I'm a reader
haul,
like you, and I've got a list. So what's going to happen is I'm going to say a few. You need to promise me that you will not judge me for leaving off the 50 that are going to either slip my mind or we don't have time for.
Absolutely not.
So like, for me, especially when I came back to comics. Well, my 9-year hiatus. So you know how I said like Sandman and Mouse is what followed me through. I walked back into my first comic shop after 9 years of staying away from comics for Neil Gaiman. He had just published Marvel 1602, which was that the old timey take on Marvel superheroes, and that's what brought me back in. To pick up the issues of that as it was coming out. Because like I was still following him. I was reading his novels and blah, blah, blah. So that brought me back in the comic shop. So Neil is number one on the list. He was that first author, right? That I followed, clearly when I was a teenager and then followed me through and then brought me back. Okay. But I am very much, there are artists that I love, right? And there are artists that I will collect. And like me as a comic consumer, it's kind of split down the middle 50-50. I am very much 50% your typical nerdy collector where I'm looking for runs, I am looking for keys, I am looking for that kind of thing, right? I've got that bug. But the other 50%, it's very much evenly split with this is somebody's stories I want to read, right? So for me, oh God, off the top of my head, I will read everything and anything and consume it again and again from Neil, from Eric Powell, from Mike Mignola, from Jeff Lemire. Oh my God,
Jeff Lemire. I love Jeff Lemire too.
From Scott Snyder, from Matt Kint, from some smaller Canadian, from Seth, from from Jason, the one named European wonderkind with the silent comics. From Craig Thompson back in the day. Jeffrey Brown from Chicago. Anything and everything. I told you guys before we started talking, I'm in the middle of a massive Garth Ennis reread, right? I just did all the war stuff. I'm in the middle of The Boys right now. I'll do Preacher next, and then I think I'm going back to the greatest run of the Punisher of all time when he did Punisher.
Yes.
There's never, guys. I don't care. I understand. I teach kids. I teach that opinions are opinions, and you're allowed to have them. But my opinion is Garth Ennis's Punisher is the best Punisher, and I am also right. So it's my opinion, but it is the correct one.
I have to agree with you on that. And I'm a Punisher. I love the Punisher. So yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, so that's just that's a smattering off the top of my head of especially writers that I will follow and read anything and everything that they will ever write.
Just curious, did you read Snow Angels by Jeff Lemire?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Awesome, great book, isn't it?
So like I got on the Jeff Lemire bandwagon second book, right? Like the sophomore thing. So right as like Essex County was coming out, right? When it was still very small and whatever. And I live in Michigan, in southeast Michigan, about halfway between Detroit and Ann Arbor. So like Canada, like you can go, down the road to Detroit from me, and Canada is a stone throw away. And like that little strip of Southern Ontario where he's telling his stories in is like, I know that place, right? Just north of Windsor and stuff like that. And like a lot of those stories and that culture and whatever was like, I got on board with that and like, oh, I know that right away. And so I locked in that relatability thing that we were talking about.
Yep. Nice.
Good deal. And I did vote. I got through.
Thank you.
You got one. You got one.
Maybe you're the one. Maybe you're the one.
I already did it.
I have no idea if you need 10,000 votes, which I'm not going to get nominated for one of these things or get that recognition or whatever. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe you're the one.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
that's 2 out of the 3 usual suspects, Jason. That means you got to get on it.
I will be. It's the Ringo Award. You think I'm not going to get on that?
Right?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's named after you, isn't it?
Pretty much.
So
Nice.
let's start with some closing thoughts here. Is there anything that we haven't discussed tonight that you'd like to get out there? About yourself, about your book, or about Source Point Press in general?
So there's a couple of things. Number one, for all the hopes and dreams that this book is fulfilled with me, I think the thing that I'm most proud of and the thing that I have the biggest hope for it is that regardless of if you read this book and there's one person that reads this book who relates to, in their own way, the struggle that Landon's going through, okay? The way his existential dread, the way his quarter-life crisis manifests, the depression, the anxiety, whatever it is for you. And the fact that one of the messages of this book is it's always better to deal with it and talk to somebody. In his case, he actually goes and seeks out professional medical help, right? It's always better because you're not alone. I don't care if it's a family member. I don't care if it's a friend. And if there's one person that reads this story and while enjoying it on its dark sci-fi level, if one person takes away, okay, I'm not alone. Whatever's going on inside me, I'm going to talk about it with somebody else. I think that's the biggest win, right? If the print run sells out, I'll be happy, right? If this Ringo thing happens, I'll be happy. I will be satisfied, elated, and at peace if one person is okay with who they are and where they need to go because they read my book. That's the one thing. Now, on a personal level, something that I would like to see. So I talked to you guys earlier about how, I can die happy because I didn't let that dream go, right? I've got a taste for it now, though, and I want to keep going.
Absolutely.
Okay? And I've got this story that is very personal to me. It's a post-World War II drama set in a small town in Michigan that is very much based on where my family grew up. Some of the things that it's very much dedicated to my late grandmother who went through some of these struggles. And it's a story of like a 15-year-old girl with identity crisis, in this case, because of some enhanced powers that she's got that manifested when her dad died in World War II a few years earlier. And it takes place in a factory that my great grandfather worked in and had like one of those World War II contracts making Marsden mats that made the temporary runways in the Pacific and the Atlantic, right, during the war. And about how all the women had to go back to the house and were unemployed. The Rosie the Riveters get kicked out when the soldiers come back home. And a lot of inequalities and a lot of identity issues. And it's a story that means a lot to me. And I'd love to publish it, right? But because we're in the world of indie comics, it's not an automatic yes just because you've done it once. So people getting out there and spreading the word about Parallel and enjoying it the way you guys did and buying a copy of it through, directly through SourcePoint or those links or through the website or whatever, that says a lot too, right? I've got a taste for it now. I want to keep telling stories. This next one's really important for me. It's dedicated not only to my late grandmother, but all the young girls who have gone through my classroom the last 20 years, who even in the 21st century are still struggling with identity. You extrapolate that back to the 1940s, and good God, what were they going through? So it's a story I want to tell, similar to Parallel in the fact that you've got your comic book fun in it, right? We've got a 15-year-old girl who can, lift a car, but the deeper messages are there too. It's about gender, it's about race, it's about identity, it's about letting yourself be who you are, and it's a story I want to tell. You can help me tell that story by telling SourcePoint you want to publish, by nominating me for those awards, right? By going and buying a digital or physical copy of Parallel, or supporting your LCS. You can go into your LCS right now and they'll still order it through Diamond for you. It's got an easy Diamond order code because they don't know my name and they maybe don't even know SourcePoint. But if you go order it with FEB20, 1983, the year Return of the Jedi came out, that's easy to remember, FEB20, 1983, they'll order you a copy. And like I said, not only does that dollar go a whole lot farther to support your LCS, to support small publishing, to support an indie comic creator like me, it might be the thing that allows me to keep my dream going for another round.
Well, I can tell you this much. I'll be buying a few copies of them myself, and I'll be giving them away to people that would like to read it on my channel. So
I
just bought several myself just now.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And
Yeah,
I
plus
think you
I want
already
that
know,
cover.
it's safe to say, a week ago, us three didn't know who you are. And by reading one story, before we even exchange words with you, you made us into fans.
Absolutely.
So whatever you're going to write
100%.
next, we're going to be following you.
100%.
And then we
Thank
hope
you so much.
that whatever you do in the future, that you would entertain coming back to talk with us again.
Gentlemen, you say the word, I will be here with bells on. I'm coming running. You call me here. This was a ridiculous amount of fun. I am not exaggerating the least when I say you are not only very good at what you do, but the way you do it makes it easier for me to do my job and have fun doing it. I had a blast. This was awesome, and I will do this again at the drop of a dime. You say the word, and I will be here.
I know. I just looked up at the time at how long we've been on, and I was like, really? Like, I felt like we just started.
Yeah.
Well,
I
yeah,
can't-
it's like talking to you is like talking with an old friend. It's very natural.
really
It's
is.
very smooth.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate the compliment, but you guys made it easy. You guys made it easy.
Well, thank you.
You're good at your job, and I appreciate you.
we appreciate that.
Well, guys,
I'm a rookie at this whole interview thing, so
and
No,
actually,
you did a great job.
this is our first show with having a creative talent on, so we wanted to do well. It's really heartening to us that you think we did well. So thank you for the compliment. We appreciate it.
Well, I consider it an honor. Thank you for inviting me. I had a blast. This was
And
great.
look, and I know I did well. You don't have to tell me. It's fine.
Right.
that's Lennon.
Right,
If you
that's
can't tell,
Lennon.
he's the Lennon of our people.
He's the ego of the group,
Yeah.
and I'm a stooge. I'm Shemp. So not many people these days know who Shemp is, but so we got Ringo, Lennon, and Shemp.
Oh, shoot. That was fun.
You are, Jason, man. It was just awesome having you on. You are welcome on this channel anytime you ever want to come on for anything. If there's something you got coming up and you want to reach out and contact us, by all means, please do so. Our door is always open for you. Everyone that joined us in the audience tonight, all of us, the usual suspects, I'm sure, Jason, we want to thank you guys for being here on the journey with us, especially in our first inaugural In the Hot Seat with the Usual Suspect show. And I don't think, gentlemen, I think you'd agree, we couldn't have had a better guest for our first time out with this
No, it
show.
was so much fun. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Well, the book's so good that we all unanimously agreed that it was mind-blowingly good. So,
And something in the book that anyone that reads it can relate to at some point in their life. Just
100%.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much. We're going to do our call outs. We'll start with Jason, go to Jimmy, me, and then we'll let Douglas, Jason Douglas sign us out last. So Ringo, hit it.
Till next time, comic book world, slot it up.
Lennon,
Until next time.
keep it casual. Take us out, Jason.
Everybody, this is the place you want to be. The next time these boys do a show, you need to be here. This is the best show on YouTube right now. Thank you, gentlemen.
Somebody clip that.
This was a blast. I had a great time. You guys are awesome. Good night, everybody.
Have a great night, guys.
Take it easy.